Now our inspection's nearly complete, but before I start putting body panels on or do any assembly work, I like to start the scooter up with everything off of it, so if there is a problem, I can take care of it a lot easier than once I've got the panels all back on. Your battery should be fully charged by now, so go ahead and take it off the charger, pick up these nuts and bolts out of the hardware kit, and take them over to your scooter. Now go grab your floorboard and battery box and bring that over to the scooter. And you should see that you've got 3 power cables, 2 positive and 1 negative. You'll want to route them through this hole in the battery box so they're sitting inside the battery box. And then just sit this down in the scooter. Now set your battery on the scooter and separate your cables here. The 2 positives should be a red wire as well as your wire with a fuse holder in it. The negative is the green wire, sometimes it'll be black. Attach the cables on the positive side first. You'll want to take one of these rectangular nuts and slide that into the terminal and try to line it up the best you can with a hole in the top of the terminal. Then take the ring terminals on both of your wires and slide them over the screw and screw that down into the nut that's inside the terminal. Do the same thing on the negative side. Then you can slide these little terminal covers into place and drop this down into the battery tray so it can't move around. Hook these 3 connectors coming out of your front panel here that are for your turn signals and the front running light up to the connectors that correspond out of the main harness, and you should be able to just match them up by color coding. Now I'm going to turn my ignition switch on, do a quick check of the electrical system. You can see here my instrument cluster lights up. To the back of the scooter, my tail light bulb is on. Now I'll go up here and locate my horn switch, my horn button, which is right on the left handlebar. You see my horn works. Just above the horn button, there's your turn signal controls. Hit it to the left. You walk behind the scooter. I've got these bulbs tied up, but you can see one of the turn signals is flashing. Go up to the front. The correct one's flashing. You also notice while you're here, the running light's on, hopefully. Do the same thing for your right hand turn signal. To cancel these, you just press the center button. Then turn the right hand signal on. Up front, you'll see it's working. In the back, you'll see the other bulbs flashing. I'm also going to do a quick check to make sure the electric start system works. So with your ignition on, you'll turn this switch here. This is your kill switch. Turn it to the run position. Hold one or both of the brake levers and then just tap this starter button real quick. Again, you're not trying to hold it down. You just want to hear that the starter engages. So you can hear that that works. Turn it back to the off position and you can turn your key off. Now I'm going to make sure both brakes are working. I'll start with the right side. This should be your front brake. That's a hydraulic disc brake, so you may have to pump it a couple times, but you should feel good pressure in there. You can try to roll it or spin the tire and make sure it stops it. If your disc brake feels squishy, most likely you've got a little air in the line, so you'll have to bleed the brakes. Now check the left side. This should be the rear brake, which is a cable operated drum brake. Squeeze the lever. In this case, you can see I can actually touch the handlebars pretty easily with a lever. Hopefully you'll have enough pressure that that's not so easy to move. If you find that the rear brake lever feels soft, move back here near the rear tire. You should find this lever assembly here. It's got the brake cable attached through it and a little nut on the end of it. So what you'll do is you'll pull this lever backwards and tighten this nut up. The tighter you make this nut, the more resistance you'll feel at your brake lever. The looser it is, the less. What you want to do is you'll make sure you get a good brake lever feel. And you also want to be able to spin the tire without the brake stopping it. If you try to spin the tire and it's stopping it, you've got this adjusted in too far and you need to back it out some. You also want to make sure you don't have it so far out that when you hit the lever that it won't stop your tire. After the scooter started, I'll show you how to adjust this idle mixture screw. But before we even start the scooter, what you want to do is take a small flathead screwdriver, turn that screw in until it seats lightly. And while you're doing it, count how many turns it takes to seat the screw. Then once you know how many turns it takes, you may want to write that down somewhere. Turn it back out the same amount of turns. The reason to do that is so if you have trouble with the idle after you set the mixture, you can always go back to where it was stock and see if that helps. Go around to the other side of the scooter and take a look at the idle speed screw. What you're looking for is that this throttle linkage here and this bracket hopefully are adjusted so there's about maybe an 1/8 inch roughly of clearance between those two. If you see a lot more clearance than that, you may want to back this screw off with a Phillips head screwdriver a little bit. This screw controls your idle speed, so if it's in too far, making that gap too wide, then it's the same as having the throttle open a little bit more, and that could make your scooter take off when you start it. Now you can take the gas cap off and fill the scooter up with fuel. If you've installed a manual fuel shutoff valve as I have, now you can go ahead and turn that on, and you should see gas start to flow through the lines and into the filter. If you're still using a vacuum petcock, there's two ways to prime it. The first is to remove the vacuum hose that connects to the intake manifold, take it off of the intake manifold and apply suction, and hopefully you'll see that fuel starts flowing through the lines. The second is to crank the engine over until you see fuel fill the lines. Once the fuel lines and filter are full, you'll want to take a look around, make sure none of your connections are leaking here, make sure the carburetor is not leaking. You want to have a Phillips head and a small flathead screwdriver handy before you start the scooter. Again, the Phillips head is going to be for your idle speed setting here. The flathead is going to be for your idle mixture setting. To start the scooter, put the kill switch in the run position. Turn your ignition switch on. You should see that your fuel gauge shows full now that you filled the tank up. Hold both brake levers and depress the starter button. Now when you press the starter button, if you haven't primed the fuel system, it's probably going to take a while. If you have primed the fuel system, hopefully it'll start up within a few seconds. You can hear that this one's idling too low, it's almost ready to cut out. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust this idle speed screw it in a little bit until the idle picks up. Once you've got your idle set to a level where it won't cut out, but it's not trying to run away and your back tire isn't spinning, then you can kind of keep an eye on the engine and let it warm up. Look for anything leaking. If you see anything leaking, shut the engine off and investigate the leak. Once it's ran for about 5 minutes, the engine should be warm. You can usually feel that the enricher here is warm. So now it's okay to go ahead and adjust the idle mixture screw. If you turn this screw in, it will lean out the mixture. If you turn this screw out, it will richen the mixture. So in is less gas and out is more gas. So I'm going to start by turning it out about 1/8 to 1/4 of a turn. And then listen, and you can hear that the idle speed is picked up. Now if the idle speed drops, you'll go back the other way. So continue to adjust the screw whichever way makes the idle speed increase. Keep going. Once the idle speed decreases, then you need to go back. Again, find the highest spot. Once you find the highest idle, turn the screw about 1/8 turn towards rich, just to err on the side of rich because rich is a safer setting. You can hear that my engine's really picked up from adjusting the idle mixture screw, so I'm going to go ahead and adjust the speed screw out a little bit to compensate. Once it's back to a normal idle, continue to adjust the idle mixture screw. Now I've found the spot that gives me the highest idle, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it 1/8 turn towards rich, which is out, and then that's my idle mixture adjustment. Now I can adjust my idle speed where I want it. If you don't have a tachometer, just adjust it to a safe level where the engine's not trying to stall out and also where it's not trying to take off, so your rear wheel shouldn't be spinning. While it's running, go ahead and give it a little gas. You want to make sure it's able to return to idle without dying out. Mess with the throttle a bit. While you're doing this, you got to be careful that the scooter doesn't get away from you, so make sure your wheel's off the ground and you've got the scooter secured. But give it some more throttle, make sure you're not hearing it try to die out on you. If it seems to be able to pick up RPM and change throttle positions without bogging or sputtering, you should have a reasonable starting point for your carburetor tune. Now I shut the scooter off, I went and grabbed my headlight housing, and I've plugged that in. I'm going to start the scooter back up and make sure both my high and low beam works on the headlight. Once you've checked it, you can turn the scooter off and unplug it and set it aside again. Let the engine cool off and then take another look around. See if you can find any puddles under the engine. Also want to take a look at all your drain plugs, make sure they're not wet around them. That's on the engine and on the gearbox. And then once it's totally cool, you'll want to go ahead and retorque your header nuts up there, make sure they're still tight. Before you begin the final assembly, some people may prefer to install some of the panels, like you would install the front panel here, the headlight, you'd need the floorboard installed, and then you'd have to drop your seat bucket on there, as well as installing your tail light. So you would make sure you had all the panels you needed for your lights to operate properly and for you to be safely seated on the scooter. And then you'd take it down the road and make sure everything works fine before you start putting panels back on. That way you can take care of any problems without having to strip it back down if any should arise.